Welcome to the WIC Science Channel. Our guest this time believes that governments have an unrecognized role in creating new innovations and even new industries. Finnish-American expert and author Petra Soderling advises, among others, the World Bank and several governments on the development and application of deep technologies. She also serves as the head of consortium relations at the Quantum Strategy Institute, an international think tank that promotes the adoption of quantum technologies by end users. Briefly, what are deep technologies? Deep technology is considered to have a particularly great potential to fundamentally change the world. Business ideas in deep technology generally are based on scientific or otherwise very advanced or deep technological expertise. So, they are not quite your traditional technology companies. The first question, then, is which deep technologies are clearly on the surface now? And what kind of deep technologies can be found beneath the surface?
Well, I work in deep technology, so I think all deep technologies are prevalent. But I could say maybe two trends that I've picked up. One trend is a trend towards more natural sciences, so that's in physics and biology and any derivative of those types of technologies. And then unfortunately also, because there's a lot of unrest in the world, there's a trend towards dual-use technology, so cybersecurity, anything that can be used by the military, but also by for civilian applications tend to be, people are investing in those technologies right now. Quantum is definitely one of the most prominent longer-term technologies. And anything else that is from the physics field, in the nano-size technologies field. I was just in a Quantum World Conference here in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, and I see the trend also for governments to come into this play. So quantum has been a research field for decades, since the 1950s, 1960s. And recent years, it has started to be commercially more viable. We've seen private investors invest in quantum technologies, mainly quantum computing. And now we've seen also many governments invest a lot of money into the research and commercialization of quantum. So the fact that we're having conferences dedicated to governments in quantum mechanics and quantum technologies is a telling sign that this is really coming into the mainstream. Even though the technology is not ready, it's very much a nascent industry. The computers are very unstable. A lot of error correction and a lot of manipulation needs to be happening in order to get any computing power out of these computers. It's still a field that both investors, private investors, but also public investors, governments are seeing that it's the future.
Petra Soderling has advised several governments and officials in deep technologies, their development and application. So we would like to know, are the topics discussed exactly the same with everyone? Or do different countries have their unique characteristics?
Yeah, it really depends on the history of the country and what types of resources. And when I say resources, I mean people. So we really shouldn't talk about resources, but what do they have? What kind of population do they have? What's the education level in the population? So it's very different to talk to, let's say, African country that has a population with a very young median age and a fairly good scientific education system versus a country like, Japan or Finland, where they're aging populations and they have long history in fields like physics, for example, or biotechnologies or healthcare and health tech education. So it really varies on where the countries are at and what type of future they see for themselves. Of course, because I talk about deep technologies, there has to be one or more very good universities or even hopefully government-funded research institutes that are doing deep science and research, not just teaching and educational purpose. And most of it is in the fields of quantum or AI. So either it's computer science or then it's physics.
What does an innovation consultant for the World Bank actually do?
Well, with the World Bank, I've had a couple of roles. One is just to bring forward the idea of deep science and deep technology on when it comes to economic development, how that's done, how countries are able to take deep science and turn that into first products, commercialize them, and then turn those products into business. So create economic advantages in the country and hopefully have, a completely new industry form that will then turn into jobs and tax revenues and then have that like virtuous cycle in economic sense. Most of the time I've spent now with the Republic of Serbia in their AI strategy. So they had an AI strategy already 2019, which was very forward-looking of them at the time. And then the World Bank has been helping them in executing that strategy and really building the three legs. One of them is to make sure that the science is there, that the computer science departments are well functioning, they have the target setting, and they have all the resources they need. Second is business. In fields like this, you need the larger companies, sort of anchor companies, but then you also need to create an inviting ecosystem for startups to come up and flourish. And then lastly, you need to make sure that the entire stack of government, be it the national government or local level cities, they are on board with the strategy because, for example, AI runs on data. And if you don't have data, then you don't really have much to work with. So the data needs to be there. It needs to be in a digital format. And it needs to be in a workable, readable format that you're able to use the tools that you have. And so it's accessible to all of your citizens wherever they live in the country.
Petra Soderling has recently published a book called Government and Innovation: The Economic Developer's Guide to Our Future. The message is that governments have a remarkable but still unrecognized role in creating new innovations and even new industries.
Oh, yes. It's everything. It's critical. It's crucial. Without government, there wouldn't be inventions such as the internet, for example, nuclear power, vaccines, radar. I mean, the list goes on and on. Innovation happens when governments fund research, and this research has to be independent from any commercial goals. And that's why it has to be funded by the government. They are long-term projects. In the US, they often come from the military budget, so there's a national security aspects to them. But once you have decades of research that was funded by the government, then as the technology comes mature, you have the opportunity for the private investors to come in and start creating companies and products out of that technology. But you never would have come up with the internet, for example, if it was up to some Silicon Valley VC. That it's just that the pockets are not deep enough in the private sector anywhere. So it's always needed. Hopefully it's strategic. I hope that governments are embracing this and not cutting budgets. It's very easy to maybe have the science to be one of the first budgets to be cut when times are tough, but it should always be a priority to have a long-term strategy of creating the scientific advancements, because that's the only way a country can have future-looking economic success. Another unique point with the government is not only do they have a lot of money and they have the capability to borrow money with very good rates, any country, even a country that's not doing so well economically, there are still, there are people who will lend you money. But governments are special in the sense that they can create laws. So they can use both the stick and the carrot in achieving whatever that goal they want. They can pass laws, regulations. They can agree trade agreements with other countries on certain goods, on certain services, and not on others. So in that sense, the old phrase that governments should not pick winners and losers doesn't hold water, because governments are picking winners and losers every day. When they make a decision, they favor something and then unfavor something else. Immigration is a point that actually nowadays is because companies and science, they need people. And if you don't have enough people in your own country, you might want to invite people from other countries. So how your government looks at immigration is an increasingly important tool in the toolbox of the government. Education, infrastructure is very, very important. Actually, in my recent book, I studied the return on investment of government infrastructure, and it's amazing. You have different studies that the ROI ranges between 20% to up to 40%, which is unheard of. You don't have any investment in the private sector with a 40% return on investment, but you do on the government side. When the government invests in an infrastructure, let's say a telecommunications network, for example. So they really have a very big toolbox full of wonderful tools that they can use.
Big disruptions are expected from quantum technologies, especially quantum computing. How prepared are governments and organizations for its advent?
They are getting to be more and more. I think EU, India, Australia, South Korea, the US, obviously, they have big budgets, so they are dedicating a lot of money into quantum science. And they're not earmarking that money into specific fields, but they trust that the scientists know how to use the money, which is very encouraging. Governments are also looking at quantum in the regulation sense, how it should be regulated. Because I think we found ourselves in a situation with AI that governments were a little slow to pick up on the trends of AI, how it's really disrupting societies, and they're only now starting to regulate AI and big tech companies in more general sense. But yeah, and they're setting up new education facilities, trying to educate their people so they will have a workforce when it's needed.
The final question for Petra. How do you envision the future quantum world from a human perspective?
How far ahead do you want me to go? Natural sciences is the fact that I think if we think about computer science as a science field, it's artificial. For the past almost 100 years, we've created these computers, these devices, by using metals and plastic and rubber, and then we had to wire them, we had to pull cables around the world so we could use them, we have to write software into them so there would be some intelligence in these otherwise dumb machines. And it's all very cumbersome and very old-fashioned. It feels old-fashioned now because I've been in quantum for 3 years. I feel like in the future we're going to be much more nature-based. When you think of quantum computing, what it is basically is you take atoms of any existing material, you manipulate those atoms so that they will create entanglement and then superposition together with other entangled atoms. And that's how you create the computing power. Quantum sensing is having these atoms in a superposition and being physically very far away from each other. So you're able to create things like a very efficient communications channel, also sci-fi feeling things like teleportation and things like that. But more, I feel like if we go 100 years into the future, we are much more in a world that is biology and nature-led. So one of the examples I keep talking about is that Elon Musk is now in Neuralink, he's inviting people to become test subjects of putting a computer chip in the brain. And that is exactly the wrong way to approach this. You don't take artificial stuff, metal and silicon, and put it inside of your body. What you do is you take your living organisms, the living cells, the atoms that form those cells, and you turn those into computing power. So I feel like in the future we're going to be living in a sci-fi feeling world where we don't have to use artificial gadgets and devices to do things. Things are just happening much more organically, much more natural based. And I hope that we have time to also save the planet before we get there so that we don't destroy everything before we actually end up in this wonderful future, sci-fi future.